would then a conversion into this concept. You cannot say in the first century someone converted to Judaism.
Right. No, exactly. You can't say in the first century someone converted to Judaism. What you could say is that someone was adopted into the Israelite people, into Bnei Yisrael. In other words, it was more like what we would think of as becoming a naturalized citizen. Now, when one becomes a naturalized citizen, one accepts on oneself the laws, and you don't come to the United States, say I want to be a citizen, but I'm going to continue to be bound by the laws of China, right? You become a naturalized citizen, you take on the laws and practices of the Nazi, and it is yeah. So it only becomes something like conversion. But what's fascinating is there are a whole series of Christian documents from the 4th century that have to do with conversion of Jews. And I've argued, and will continue to argue, that what those documents are about is actually, they're about the invention of conversion. Right? They're not real representations of Jews converting to Christianity, but they are about the invention of conversion. And the reason that, this is another argument for this, the reason that Christian writers need to invent conversion is because conversion is one of the things that makes it possible for Christianity to be defined as a religion. Now, and there's nothing invidious about this. This is not a critique of Christianity. It's very straightforward. If Tertullian is going to write, we are the only group in the world that gathers from all of the naciones, right, from all of the peoples, and form our group through fides, through faith. So you do need a new name and a new concept to articulate what that form of identity is. You can't call it natio, which is related to birth. You can't call it ethnos. You can't call it genos. It doesn't fit any of those categories. So it is this new thing. But a new semiotic category requires other members, as I said earlier, right? So then you have to have conversion. Up to in the 1st and 2nd century, somebody when I gave this lecture last week in Haifa, somebody commented this to me, and it's absolutely remarkable. Up to the 2nd century, Roman law forbade circumcision. Up to the 3rd century. After the 4th century, it forbids conversion to Judaism. Right? So, so we actually see that redefinition coming into being in several different discourses, in several different kinds of discourses. And when you see, when you can trace an epistemic shift taking place in narrative genres, in legal genres, right? In the law, in stories, in theological writing, all about the same time, that's when you know that there's really something happening, right? That was the great virtue of my friend Stephen Greenblatt's invention of the new historicism, is observing, when you can observe processes that are taking place in Shakespeare and in Elizabethan law and in preaching in Anglican churches, then you really begin to have a sense of shift in the culture.
You have the time for a last question, Peter Bayer.
This is kind of a more abstract question. In all these kinds of discussions about the development of understandings and concepts, most of the time I hear a kind of a unidirectionality, right? would like you to comment on the possibility of regress and change to a situation where something was there one day and the next day it's actually not there anymore. If that within the period that is your expertise, whether you have instances of that kind of development.
First of all, you're absolutely right. The two aspects of the unidirectionality are really simplistic. Two aspects. One is the assumption that you'll sometimes, get as if, on February 15th, 1915, on or about February 15th, 1915, human nature changed, right? That's actually something Virginia Woolf wrote, I think, right? And that seems to be in some ways the motto of certain Foucauldians, epigonic Foucauldians, right? So that's an illusion. Things are developing, and there are always prior developments that ultimately get aggregated together into some sort of tectonic shift that takes place over, usually depending on the nature of the shift, over decades or over centuries. So that's one aspect of which is wrong. Secondly, there are always survivals. So if religio in Latin starts to mean something like what we mean religion, it still can be used for to mean something else entirely for hundreds of years and even now. In Catholic parlance, the religious are the monks and the nuns. Right? This is not because they're more pious than lay Catholics. It's because they have a lot more rules that they have to follow. So that's why they're religiosi, right? So it follows a very ancient sort of Latin usage of religious. Secondly, given the second point that there are survivals, the survivals are always open, possible to revival, and then you would have a sort of reversal of epistemic shift. And I'll give you an example of something I actually argued for and then got cold feet about. But maybe I'll warm my feet up again. In Borderlines, I argued that in the Mishnah itself, we see the shoots, like the little plants, the shoots of a notion of something like religion for Jews, in the sense that there are some texts that seem to imply that Jews who do not behave as Jews are no longer Israel. This goes to Dr. Scott's question also. But that later, following that, by the time of the Babylonian Talmud, this is completely wiped out, any such notions. By the time of the later rabbis, the normative statement is, an Israelite, even though he sins, remains an Israelite. Right? Which completely negates that notion that one becomes not Israel by worshiping idols or whatever. Right? So that would be, if that hypothesis is not totally far-fetched, that particular historical hypothesis, that would be an example precisely where one gets a move in a certain direction, which is then reversed. Yeah. So in principle, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I am sure that we are going to have more time to ask a question personally to our speaker. But before we go, before this wonderful spiritual, intellectual food, or whatever you want to name it, we have some more material refreshment and drinks. So if you want to stay with us, but please, before that, let's join me once again to thank Professor